Imagine being an unarmed man, 3 officers holding you down, one with a knee on your neck. Imagine that they are relentlessly applying force while you plead for your life, while you call for your mother. Imagine them choking the life from you, checking your pulse to make sure you don't have one, then choking you 3 more minutes for good measure, and then waiting 3 more minutes before calling an ambulance to help. Imagine being a 17-year-old bystander on the street, watching this unfold. Imagine you're a witness to what appears to be a murder. Few people on the planet had heard about George Floyd until he was killed. The police officer was subsequently charged with murder after he had knelt on his neck during an arrest. You know, that video that documented that killing was so disturbing that YouTube posted a warning to potential viewers to watch it at their own discretion, to watch it at their own peril. Because what took place was so alarming, even the supervisor who made the initial call to the police in the first place told one of his employees to call the police on the police. You know, I've seen some horrific things in my day. But George Floyd's death upset my soul. It devastated and sparked something within me that I didn't even know was there. But it also uplifted and sparked an anger within that community. And some members and residents of Minneapolis, Minnesota rose in civil unrest. And that unrest not only erupted in Minneapolis, but in hundreds of communities in all 50 states, including, I understand small towns and rural areas never heard of before, and probably never had those kind of experiences. There was a feeling not only of outrage, but hopelessness that gripped people from all stations of life. One of the Minneapolis residents said they felt as if the knee was on the neck of his community. In her talk last week, Reverend Deborah spoke on the topic of befriending our filter. We all have them. They shape our perception of life, including my own. It's particularly evident when an event like the killing of George Floyd happens and the protests that follow after the video of his death were viewed all over the world. Needless to say, a number of people want to know, why is what's going on happening? What does it mean? Help me understand. What are the solutions? Some of those folks direct the questions directly to me. Well, I don't know if I know more than anyone else. I have my own perception and my own filter that I see things through. You know, I'm going to address it today from my perspective and from my spiritual understanding, not because I want to necessarily. It's actually hard and at times uncomfortable to have a conversation like this. And frankly, I wish this was something I did not have to address. But as the Rolling Stones said in their song, you can't always get what you want, but you do get what you need. So I guess on some level I must, for it's a critical topic of our time. You know, as we build on this idea of filters and perceptions, I was reading recently an article by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was a former NBA great. And he asked in this article that was in the Los Angeles Times, what was your first reaction when you saw the video of the white police kneeling on George Floyd's neck? And Floyd died and said, I can't breathe. Some have little or no familiarity with individuals like George, may have muttered a horrified, oh my God, while shaking their head at the cruel injustice. Many African Americans leapt to their feet, cursed, maybe threw something or wanted to throw something, shouting, "Not freaking again," but they didn't say freaking. At the same time, they remembered the two vigilantes accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery as he jogged through their neighborhood in February, and how if it wasn't for the video emerging somehow, they would have gotten away with it. And how those Minneapolis police officers claimed that Floyd was resisting arrest, but a store's video showed that he was not. And how the cop on Floyd's neck wasn't an enraged extremist, white nationalist stereotype person, but a sworn officer who looked calm, entitled, and devoid of pity or concern. So what do you do when you see those angry protesters amassing outside the police station with raised fists? Some may be thinking they certainly aren't physically distancing. You know, when you notice the faces of individuals breaking into stores, and by the way, many of those are simply opportunists and could care less about justice or the cause, by the way, but if you see individuals do that, perhaps you think, well, that hurts their cause. Then you see the police station on fire, and you may wag your finger in saying, that's putting the cause backward. But as Jabbar wrote, you're not wrong, but you're not right either. You know, the African American community, the black community is often used to the institutional racism inherent in education, the justice system, and jobs. And even though we do all the conventional things to raise public as well as political awareness, such as write articulate, insightful pieces in glossy magazines, explain the continued devastation on network TV, cable television, support candidates in politics who promise change, the needle for many hardly budges. And so people say, help me understand why this is going on. Many remember or know similar instances that have taken place in U.S. history. You know, there was one event that deeply affected me many years ago and happened to an African American man who was a cousin of one of my high school classmates. And his name was Arthur McDuffie. Arthur McDuffie was an insurance agent and former Marine, was beaten into a coma by a dozen police officers after he had ran a red light on his motorcycle. And the officers, after research, were found to immediately try to cover up their crime to stage that it was an accident. Well, Arthur McDuffie died several days later as a result of the injuries that he suffered, and an investigation led to arrest. But 5 months after McDuffie was buried, a jury acquitted the officers of all charges. A rebellion spontaneously erupted right after the verdict was published. Many in the community that I was in were bitterly recalling how justice was not served in that case. But that case was just one of a heap of kindlewood that had been piling up and waiting for a spark to set ablaze what our country is experiencing right now. So in order to understand why this is happening, to see the long view, we have to look at it from a bigger perspective and get a background on why things have led to what it is now. You know, I picked a handful out of hundreds of incidences that have led to where we are today. Because I'm a history buff, and I remember reading about in 1868 the Ku Klux Klan and whites organized national terror campaigns that massacred tens of thousands of black people across the country. In the summer of 1919, a widespread rebellion broke out across the United States when black veterans returned from World War I with notions of equality. Many of these riots involved police officers. Few of the participants of the lynch mobs were convicted. In 1955, a 14-year-old boy by the name of Emmett Till was kidnapped, tortured, and killed, wrapped in barbed wire, and thrown into the Tallahatchie River in Monet, Mississippi, after a woman by the name of Carolyn Bryant tells a white lie. His murderers are never convicted, even after publicly confessing to the crime. In 1961, Birmingham, Alabama Police Commissioner Bull Connor, along with the Ku Klux Klan co-conspirators, working along with them, coordinating with him, an attack on freedom fighters. Klansmen and recruited racists beat, firebombed, and hospitalized peaceful protesters in Anniston, Alabama. In 1963, supremacists, one of whom was an FBI informant, bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, killing a 14-year-old by the name of Adie Mae Collins, and also Cynthia Wesley and Carol Peterson, as well as an 11-year-old Denise McNair, as they were putting on their choir robes. In 1965, Alabama state troopers shot an individual by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson, a non-violent protester. In 1991, a video camera captures 4 Los Angeles police officers in the Department of Los Angeles beating Rodney King in one of the first viral police brutality videos that had ever come out. In 1992, a jury acquits 4 officers who beat Rodney King, and a rebellion ensued. In 1999, 4 New York Police Department officers shot and kills a 23-year-old Amadou Diallo. The officers were acquitted on all charges. In 2012, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin is stalked, chased, and shot by George Zimmerman after 9/11 operators tell Zimmerman to leave the teenager alone. 6 weeks after the shooting, Zimmerman was arrested and subsequently acquitted of murder. In 2014, again in New York, an officer by the name of Daniel Patalillo kills Eric Garner. Patalillo was never convicted of a crime. In 2014, in Ferguson, Missouri, Officer Darren Wilson shoots and kills an 18-year-old Mike Brown Jr. Wilson was not charged with the crime at all. And then in 2014, Cleveland police officer Timothy Lohman kills 12-year-old Tamir Rice. Lohman is not charged with anything. In 2015, Sandra Bland is found hanged in a jail cell after a dash cam captures her brutal arrest by state trooper Brian Ngibma. He's never convicted or charged with anything. And then in 2016, Anthony, a gentleman by the name of St. Anthony, I think of Minnesota, the police officer Yanez shoots Philando Castile during a traffic stop in which Castile was not driving or committing a crime. The police officer was acquitted of all charges. And in 2016, Los Angeles police officer shot 37-year-old Alton Sterling as he lays on the ground restrained by officers. No one was charged with anything. And then 2018, Sacramento police officers opened fire on 23-year-old Stephon Clark, striking him 8 times, 6 of which were in his back. No one was ever charged with Clark's death. In February, a vigilante mob in Brunswick, Georgia, chases down and shoots a 23-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, killing him. Travis and Gregory McMichael have been arrested for his death after more than 2 months of freedom. A 3rd man has also been charged. The verdict still remains out. And in February, or rather this past May, the Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin kneels on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. 2 minutes and 53 seconds of which occurred after Floyd was unconscious. Floyd dies. Now the officer is eventually charged with 3rd-degree murder, now up to, I think, 2nd-degree murder. He had gone free for 4 days after this had happened. And on May 27th, Minneapolis residents said, "Screw this, forget this." On May 29th, present to right now, America and the world says, "Screw this, forget this." And as I noted, I know it went on a little bit, but this is just a snippet of the perceived injustice that took place and represent the pile of wood kindlings waiting for that spark. And that spark came when the killing of George Floyd took place. So here we are. Upheaval across the United States and around the world. And the question is, what is the solution? Last week or so, I wrote a piece, a blog that reflected on this question. And I noted that I read a book by Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, and it popped up into my awareness. And I read that many years ago when I was in high school. It was during the time that I think I wrote that it was one of those eras in which I was a wannabe revolutionary. And it wasn't a spiritual book, but it did trigger a way of looking at what is going on regarding George Floyd's killing and the civil unrest that followed the video's public viewing. Mr. Fanon, a psychiatrist, analyzed the post-war decolonization in Algeria. Mr. Fanon proposes and posits that colonial rule's oppressive violence set the seeds of a similar reaction from the recipients of that oppression. And it took this counter-reaction to restore the balance of the universe and to give the people back their humanity and their liberation so that everyone would benefit. I don't know if I necessarily, adhere to that belief or advocate anything that's happening today, but the key takeaway for me is that it's messy at any given moment when we're trying to be part of humanity's evolutionary process. Here is where I think we can see from a spiritual perspective, at least a different perspective, a different lens, that the nature of the universe is always growth and movement, moving into harmony. However, this growth is hardly ever a smooth, linear, or a continuous process. It is akin to the progression of ideas of the evolution of life. The protests that followed the widespread, gut-wrenching viewing of the killing of George Floyd reveal America at a boiling point. And we are at a critical phase of our journey as human and spiritual beings. But understand, the veil has been lifted for all to see. Of course, racism is not dead. People naively believe that the election of Barack Obama, that it was over, time to move on, nothing to see here. But there's another lens from African Americans and others who knew that it was not true. And in some police departments, this is a rampant way of being. My son Jalen, who was very frustrated by this whole experience, reminded me of a quote attributed to Mark Twain, in which he said that history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. In that story about Emmett Till, who I mentioned earlier, in which that 14-year-old African-American boy was murdered in August of 1955 in a racist attack that shocked the nation and provided a catalyst for the emerging civil rights movement. Till was a Chicago native. He was visiting some relatives in Monet, Mississippi, and he was accused of harassing a local woman. And on her deathbed, the woman admitted it never happened. Nevertheless, several days later, relatives of that woman abducted Till, brutally beating and killing him before disposing of his body in a nearby river. Till's devastated mother insisted on an open casket funeral for her son, even though he looked very bad, in order to shed light on the violence inflicted on many in the South. Till's murderers were acquitted, but his death galvanized civil rights activists nationwide. Those who fought for civil rights gave Emmett Till's life meaning. Emmett Till's life was a sacrifice for a bigger purpose. And of course, when we say sacrifice, it means to make something sacred. George Floyd's life can be made sacred. It can be made sacred in a way to usher a new energy and a new force of change and transformation around the world. Interestingly, unlike in the past, we're coming into the realization that we all have skin in the game. And one thing I noticed about the protesters, at least the peaceful ones, there was a diverse group of people there, young people, mature people, black people, white people, Latino people, Asian people, not just the African American community, but people all over the stripes. Protests took place, even the protests that take place around the world have been happening. In Berlin and Paris and cities in Africa and Latin America and the Middle East, to name a few. Understand that racism cannot be eradicated by black people or one group, but by our white brothers and sisters. It takes everybody together to possess the consciousness to get rid of the scorn of racism and bigotry. We do not want to merely have pity for the Floyd family, though we empathize and grieve with them. Nor do we have time to just be bystanders and see what's going on. What is about today and what's really erupting today is the need for participation and asking this question: what is my role in this inflection point in time? We're in a time in which everything is up in the air, where the veil has been lifted for all the world to see, and also the place where possibilities are also abound. And of course, it starts in our own consciousness. I was watching a program in which a panel of spiritual teachers and the lawyer for the Lloyd family were discussing what can be done. And somewhere in the discussion it was noted that African Americans are called to tap into the vibrational frequency and power of their ancestors. That power of their ancestors that were there before the Mayflower, before the enslavement of Africans. And to call upon that power to be lifted to the omnipresence of God and to walk with that kind of empowerment. One of the panelists called upon our white brothers and sisters to tap into their ancestry of the great abolitionists who said no to man's inhumanity to man. It cannot and will not happen on our watch. The great abolitionists said, no, we got to do something. So people wrote about it, pushed for laws to change direction of the country. Others risked their freedom. Many did so much. There's a call to everyone to do their part, to do what they can. And then we will transcend to even the ancestral realm and come to that common meeting place in the eternal, that place where we are all one. And there is a downpouring of light where the world as we know it, the world as we know it now ends. And there is a birth of a new world, a new heaven, and a new earth. And in that new world, we ask, what is mine to do? What is my gift? What can be my contribution? And we will remember whatever we do to someone else, we do to ourselves. Whatever we say to someone else, we say to ourselves. And whenever anyone is suffering, we are part of that suffering. Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in his letter from the Birmingham jail, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects everyone indirectly. This is why, unless and until we are holding a space of compassion and seeking to eliminate that suffering, that we are all one in this glorious stew of the cosmos, stirred together to create a delicious dish of spiritual freedom for everyone, and for beauty and wholeness on the planet to take place. The gospel is this. The good news is this. We're all in this together. And we do not bypass the pain, but we fully embrace its crucifixion. The sting of that crucifixion, the emotions, the anger, the fear, the upsetness is all part of the journey. We must get ourselves out of the way first, and then let the Spirit run our life, individually and collectively. And like John from the Isle of Patmos envisioned, we will see the new heaven. We will see the new earth. As always, the choice is ours. Peace and blessings to you.